patron St. Charles Borromeo, who was first introduced to us by our founder, Father Adrian Brazzi. He said, "My dear daughters, your newly born congregation will be named after this holy cardinal, St. Charles Borromeo. In 1684, the church commemorates his death centenary. It is fitting to take his patronage to this small group, as he is a man of compassion, known for self-sacrifice, his love for the poor and the church, and for his daring courage to plunge himself into the challenges and the needs of the time. Surely we will take his exemplary life of holiness and dedicated service to the service of the Lord."
Good day to all of you. We are indeed glad to present to you a small bird's eye view of the life of St. Charles. Charles Borromeo lived only 46 years, but he accomplished more during his brief life than most of us who lived to twice his age. It is surprising to see his huge strength in his weak body, daring spirit in his alert mind, and mighty courage amidst enormous opposition. Here we are, Sisters of St. Charles Convent, Sindhuvalli, who will give to you a few glimpses of his life journey.
Born into nobility in 1538, Charles seemed destined for a life of luxury, but he stepped away early from those temptations. Granted an income from the wealthy Benedictine abbey for his studies, he made certain that any money beyond his basic needs was donated to the poor. Attending the University of Pavia, he was considered slow because of a slight speech impediment, but he confounded his critics by earning a double doctorate in civil and canon law and became an eloquent speaker. When his uncle, Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Medici, became Pope Pius IV in 1559, he invited Borromeo to come to employ his talents. This is an opportune situation. Borromeo could have been exploited, but after his uncle made him a cardinal at the age of 21, he used his elevation to the advantage of the church. One can surely envy and call it a speciality from Pope Pius IV, but looking at the events that took place through St. Charles, don't you feel it as a divine choice and intervention?
Trust placed by Pope Pius IV in his holy and dedicated nephew came true when he helped his uncle revive and complete the Council of Trent, which had begun in 1545 and had been repeatedly delayed and interrupted. During its final sessions in 1562 to 63, Pius IV depended heavily on his nephew. After it was concluded, Borromeo took the lead in implementing its decrees and bringing out the Roman Catechism in 1566. By then, he had been ordained and had been appointed as the Archbishop of Milan, a diocese nearly in ruins due to an 80-year absence of archbishops. Since it was the largest archdiocese in Italy with 3,000 clergy and 8 lakhs people, this diocese needed to be saved. Many religious and laity had fallen away from the church, and many who remained were corrupt or wayward. Borromeo was undaunted. With a cheerfulness and determination that astonished his contemporaries, he travelled up and down his diocese, enacting vigorous reforms in line with Trent and the Roman Catechism. He convoked 6 provincial and 11 diocesan synods, founded seminaries to educate a new generation of priests, established hospitals, and set aside his large inheritance for the needs of the poor. He renewed religious life and started a new congregation of secular priests, the Oblates. In 1576, when a plague struck Milan, many of the healthy fled, but Borromeo remained in the city, visiting the plague stricken and comforting the dying. In one extraordinary episode, he climbed a stalk of corpse to give the last rites to a man who was still breathing and begging for the
1 minute.
sacraments.
Being a man of action, profound charism, undaunted spirit, and severe austerity and self sacrifice, he became a beloved, eminent figure, except for those who opposed his reforms and disciplinary measures. For standing firm against evil, Borromeo was condemned and had his life threatened. Once he was tried to be stabbed, but miraculously saved. As one of his biographers commented, he was not discouraged. He had continued to do what he could to regenerate Milan, to make the people live honest, God fearing lives.
His love for the Word of God and prayer before crucifix shows his passion for Christ. He had recourse to Our Lady of Rosary, which also contributed in his victory of Lepanto. Even in his sickness, he had meticulously prepared for the councils and conclaves. Inspired by this, I pray that through the intercession of St. Charles, may God continue to help us to live worthy of our calling. May He spur us on with dedication and love for His service with much more enthusiasm and vigor, even amidst opposition and challenges.
One of his most famous teachings, centered on Holy Communion, is that the people should not only be urged to receive Holy Communion frequently, he wrote, but also how dangerous and fatal it would be to approach the sacred table of divine food unworthily. In a separate sermon on the subject, he stressed, the Most Holy Eucharist is properly a sacrament of the living. It requires, therefore, that those who receive it be spiritually living, for it was instituted for the sake of sustaining and increasing life. Therefore, he who remains in death, who is in mortal sin, should stay far from the table. Let him first hasten to life, to penance. For the sacrament of confession is the first and necessary disposition for the Eucharist. Charles lived what he preached. Let us also reflect on how we approach the divine table. Though we receive Jesus every day in our heart, what is our attitude and gratitude to Him?
He was working miracles when he was alive. In 1579, on the way to Rome, while going through the valley of Bidente near Camaldoli, in one of the steeper passes, one of his servants fell into a ravine with his horse. St. Charles, hearing the cry of the unfortunate man, immediately made the sign of the cross towards him. The fall of the unfortunate rider was broken, as he clung to the slender bush, while the horse fell into the depth of the abyss. Those present ascribed the saving of their companion to the prayers of St. Charles.
It might be argued that St. Charles, for all his zeal and goodwill, was a man for another time and not suited to the Church after Vatican II. The problem with this narrative is that the two popes who led the council loved Borromeo and wanted his teachings to influence the contemporary Church. St. John 23rd wrote 5 volumes on Borromeo and was so devoted to the great reformer that he arranged his coronation as Pope to take place on St. Charles' feast day, November 4th. After John's death, Blessed Paul VI sent the bishops of the world a dozen of Borromeo's orations in Latin in hope of guiding their deliberation at Vatican II. More recently, Pope Benedict XVI celebrated the 400th anniversary of St. Charles' canonization, just as Pius X had honored the 300th. And now, after a long wait, many of Borromeo's most important commentaries have been translated into English under the title Charles Borromeo's Selected Orations, Homilies, and Writings. Yes, our patron is a man of all ages. His life, his practices, and his teachings are valued and relevant even to this day.
Borromeo's influence endures because he understood three things. First, that the role of a faithful bishop is not to accommodate or enable sin, but to teach the faithful what is right and wrong according to the gospel and Christ's church. Second, that all reforms begin within the individual heart and consequently there will be no church reform unless the people carrying it out live honorable and reformed lives themselves. Finally, that there is a monumental difference between true reform and false reform, and that Catholics should expose and flee from the latter if they have any regard for their eternal salvation and the salvation of others.
As Pope St. Pius X affirmed that St. Charles is a model for both clergy and people in these days because he was an unwearied advocate and defender of the true Catholic Reformation, opposing those innovators whose purpose was not the restoration but the effacement and destruction of faith and morals. He worked hard to regenerate the ecclesiastical spirit in various places where faith was dying because of the lack of interest from the clergy and religious. Charles forgave even his worst enemies. His hospitality was so remarkable, so much so, it must be the characteristic of his daughters as well.
Charles Borromeo is one of the shining lights who shone out of the Catholic Reformation. Together with Saint Ignatius of Loyola and Saint Philip Neri, he fought bravely for the reform of the Catholic Church and helped establish seminaries that would properly educate future priests. He was a principal actor behind the Council of Trent and assisted in the creation of the first universal catechism of the Catholic Church. What propelled him forward was his devout prayer life, coupled with a charitable heart, always striving to practice what he preached. Here are 5 inspiring quotes from St. Charles, patron saint of catechists and bishops.
If we wish to make any progress in the service of God, we must begin every day of our life with new eagerness. We must keep ourselves in the presence of God as much as possible and have no other view or end in all our actions but the divine honor. We must meditate before, during, and after everything we do. The prophet says, I will pray and then I will understand. This is the way we can easily overcome the countless difficulties we have to face day after day, which, after all, are part of our work. In meditation, we find the strength to bring Christ to birth in ourselves and in others.
If a tiny spark of God's love already burns within you, do not expose it to the wind, for it may get blown out. Keep the store tightly shut so that it will not lose its heat and grow cold. In other words, avoid distractions as well as you can. Be sure that you first preach by the way you live. If you do not, people will notice that you say one thing but live otherwise, and your words will bring only cynical laughter and a derisive shake of the head. Stay quiet with God. Do not spend time in useless chatter.
St. Charles, our patron, died on 3rd November by saying, Behold, I come. He looked like a skeleton, nothing on the bones but skin. Thus the saint died like a lamp that is extinguished when all the oil is burnt out. He was always an emitter of light, which no clouds of weakness or passion could ever darken, no bodily obstacles obscure. He left the world but began an eternity in heaven. May we be kindled in the fire of divine charity with which his heart burned. Like him, may we continue to become hands and voice of the Christ for the poor and the needy. Thank you for giving us this unique opportunity to share these few reflections on the legend of the Church, St. Charles. May God bless us and help us to be ignited with the spirit and great love for the Church.